Good. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the webinar lab and the first of our four-part series of webinars where we're going to be teaching you how to run the world's best B2B webinars. And we're going to be doing that over the next 4 weeks with lots of guest speakers and lots of research from our side. We're going to be teaching you all about how to run the world's best webinars, the process of how to do it, and some tips and tricks on being a host as part of a webinar, following up after a webinar, and the marketing before a webinar as well. Today, we're going to be speaking with Tom Nicholls. He's going to be joining us later on. He's having some technical issues at the moment, which hopefully we'll be able to get fixed. But he's going to be joining us later on for an interview, and he's also going to be joining us for the Q&A as well. So like I said, if you've got any questions as we go through the content today, please do put them in the questions on the right-hand side of your screen. This is a new platform. Most people wouldn't have used this before, so everything that you need is on the right-hand side of the screen. So if you've got any questions, pop them there. First of all, a little bit about myself. So I'm Tom Parker. I'm the CMO of Atomley and Atomley Fusion. And I've got 4 years of really hands-on experience running webinars for myself and my businesses, but also for my clients' businesses as well. This is before COVID. There was such a thing as virtual events before COVID. They were very successful before. They were very successful during, and we're certain that they're going to be very successful afterwards as well. So yeah, I've run dozens of webinars over my career. And someone else that's also done that is Tom, who we're going to be talking to later. He's the CCO of the AI consultancy Datasparq. There he is. Hello, Tom. Hello. So he's going to be also talking to us about his experiences as well, and how he managed to generate 250k from a cold lead that came to one of his webinars last year, and how he continues to have success today with webinars in 2022 as well. So what we're going to be covering. First of all, we are not pitching you anything today. So when we were sending invites for today, one of the recipients of our invite said this to us, which is just an anonymized screen grab from LinkedIn. Thanks for reaching out. So is the webinar full of companies pitching their businesses? That is not what we're doing, and that is the number one problem with webinars today. Everyone is using them as a way to pitch themselves, their businesses, their products and services. We don't believe in that. We believe in using webinars to educate people, to do thought leadership, to build relationships, and then hopefully you can sell to them afterwards. But really, that's a byproduct of doing a great job of content, putting the right content out there and educating people on what you do and how to do it better. So George, if you're listening, thank you for the message. We've actually had a conversation since then, and we're talking about partnering up. So yeah, that proves that even when you don't get a great response to start with, webinars are still a great way of opening a relationship with someone. Our main objective throughout this whole series of webinars over the next 4 weeks is to help B2B firms host the world's best customer generation webinars. And that's really important because the types of webinars that we do and that we do with our customers and we want to educate you about today are lead generation, customer generation, revenue generation, whatever you want to call it, webinars. We use thought leadership and education as a vehicle for that, but really this is all about generating leads. We are not talking here about 2-hour-long market research webinars and things like that. This is specifically focused on building pipeline. And over the course of the series, we're going to be covering 4 main topics. So the first is today's conversation with Tom about how he generated that 250k deal from one of his webinars last year, and he's going to be sharing his experiences. Secondly, we're going to be talking to Josh, who's the head of that Make the Boat Go Faster, and bums on seats, how to get people engaged before the webinar and make sure that they actually turn up, they actually attend the webinar. Lots of people fall short there, so we're going to be talking all about that with Josh and also with Daniel Rose, who is a copywriter. He writes brilliant invite copy and landing page copy. So I'm going to be teaching you all about that next week. Then we're going to be talking about the platform technology and what to do during your webinar. So we're going to be talking with Sonia Schmidt, who is the Chief Growth Officer of Tevent, which is the platform that we're using right now to stream this webinar. And we're also going to be talking about how to engage with an audience. It's not just about the technology, it's also about how you build content and engage with the audience as well. So I'm going to be talking about that on the 8th of June. And then finally, the week after, on the 15th of June, we're going to have Dan back on again, and we're also going to be speaking to Scott Cowley, who is a sales coach and head of sales at Custify. And those guys are going to be talking to us about what to do after the webinar, so how to use all of the content, all of the learnings from the conversations that you have, the engagement of the polls, which we've just activated a poll now if you want to complete that on the right-hand side, and also the surveys that we do after, in order to generate a sales conversation and keep that conversation going. So that's the next 4 weeks. You can see a theme. It's pre-webinar, during webinar, and post-webinar. And we're going to go in depth into what to do in each of those 3 stages. So why are we doing this? Well, we still believe that webinars work. People are saying that webinars are dead. It's not true. It's all about pivoting and trying to do the right thing with your webinars. The traditional formats, the pitching, like I said, pitch fests, they don't work. But if you're innovative in the way that you do webinars, it does work. So here are some of the formats that we have tried and tested, we've used with our clients, we've used ourselves, and we know that they work. So the first of those is wine tasting roundtables, or roundtables in general. So Tom's going to talk to us a little bit about how to do that in the particular format that he did it, so I won't steal his thunder, we'll come on to that later. But a round table format is a smaller volume of people attending, much more intimate, much more discussion-based types of webinars. So you might have 15, 20 people instead of a mass webinar, which is what we're doing today. The second, which Will It Make the Boat Go Faster, does really well, and Josh will be talking about this next week, is more of the mass attendance thought leadership webinar, which is what we're doing right now. That's all about educating people en masse, maybe 100, 150 people at once. It's more top of funnel in terms of your marketing funnel. And the guys at Will It Make the Boat Go Faster do this really well. It helps that they've got an ex-gold winning Olympian at the helm who actually presents their webinars. So that celebrity status really helps. But we're going to be sharing the tips on how you can emulate Ben Hunt Davis's success when he presents those webinars. And then the third type of format that we've seen work really well is targeted ABM, what we call ABM webinars. We can't reveal who did this, who we did this research with, because it would reveal their strategy. But a summary version of it is targeting one account, one team, or even one individual person that you want to sell to, and running a webinar just for that team or that person. The company that we worked with actually invited the person that they were trying to sell to as the guest on their webinar, and they picked a topic to talk about, which they knew was very hot on that person's agenda. And so they built a great relationship by having this host and guest relationship on the webinar, and then they actually managed to sell a multi-million-dollar, multi-year deal off the back of that. So webinars can range from top of funnel, mass engagement, mass audience, right down to running a webinar for one person. And so it's all about choosing the right format for the outcome that you're trying to achieve, basically. And that's what we're going to be teaching you guys over the next few weeks. So the problem statement, why are people doing webinars in the first place? Or why would you consider doing webinars? Well, first of all, marketers and salespeople are under extreme pressure, and more so nowadays, with everything that's going on in the economy, to deliver high intent leads, not just any old lead, but high intent leads. And the research that we've done from various sources, we can provide this research afterwards, says that 73% of people that do webinars, this was in 2021, say that they were the best lead generation channel. So out of all of the different marketing strategies that you could use, they say that webinars are the best lead generation channel for generating high intent or qualified leads. So why don't we see enough of them? Well, it's partly because of the selecting the format thing, which I said a minute ago. But there are three kind of main problem statements that we hear time and time again when we speak to our clients and prospects. 57% of people that don't do webinars at the moment said that they just don't have time. The second issue is measuring the success. So 85% of the people that don't do them said that they're, not in these words, but basically scared to run webinars because they're not sure if they can even prove the ROI of doing that. And they have to prove to their boss that spending X £1,000 on events in general is going to prove an ROI, and they're not sure whether they can measure that effectively and prove that ROI. So they don't even do them in the first place. And the third thing is that it's too risky. So some people are really worried that they're not going to get the attendees that they want, and that therefore it's going to be a failure, and they don't do them as a result of that. The attendance in itself isn't the key metric that you should really be looking out for. Even if only a few people turn up, if they're highly engaged and they convert into high intent leads, then that's still potentially going to have a positive ROI. So the lack of attendance is a risk or a worry that people have that maybe they shouldn't have, and we're going to talk to you about why that is. Okay, so what does good look like when it comes to webinars, successful webinars? Well, we've proven that you can generate 5 times more sales opportunities by doing a good webinar versus doing a bad webinar or not doing one at all. So you can generate a higher volume of pipeline by doing good webinars, good quality webinars. Secondly, you can deliver bigger deal sizes. So Tom's going to talk about this later. He's over on this screen. Tom's going to talk about this later, how he managed to develop this 250k lead and also 6-figure pipeline outside of that as well. And those deal sizes are actually bigger than you typically would see if you weren't doing this thought leadership and building this trust through webinars. So it's possible to increase the volume, increase the deal sizes, and also reduce your sales cycle time as well. So some of the biggest issues that particularly enterprise salespeople face is that their sales cycles are too long. It takes months to close a deal from start to finish. If you can incorporate webinars, educational webinars into your sales and marketing process, you can actually reduce that time drastically. People trust you more. They want to engage with you. It reduces the amount of time it takes to actually close them. So, by no means is it a silver bullet, but you can achieve increased volume, increased deal sizes, and reduced sales cycle times if you do them properly. So how do you do them properly? That's what everyone's here to find out, I suppose. So let's get on to that. And this is where we're going to start digging deeper into some of the actual valuable content, the stuff that the education that we've got to provide you, which is what I was talking about a minute ago. So we have a 3-step process that we deploy. First of all, acquiring the right attendees. Secondly, delivering the world's best webinars. Sounds easy, it is possible. And converting those attendees into revenue. And obviously from a salesperson's point of view, that's the most important element of running these webinars in the first place. So the first step, we're going to break it down into 3 sub-steps. So acquisition broadly breaks down into identification, content research, and attendee acquisition. Identification, first of all, is all about ICP management. So you need to be able to map your ideal customer profile, the persona, the individual that you're actually trying to reach, and the type of business that you're trying to reach. You need to be able to map that out so that you can invite the right people. If you invite the wrong people to your webinar, you're not going to be able to generate valuable relationships and close deals off the back of that. So mapping your personas, your ICPs, whatever you want to call them in your methodology, mapping those out and being able to identify the individual people that you want to invite is super important. Secondly, it's all about the research. This is probably one of the most important pieces. The right people could come to your webinar through the identification process, but if you're not targeting them with the right content, then it's not going to speak to them. They're not going to understand what you're saying. So the content research is all about right-sizing the content that you deliver to the audience that you've invited. The best way to do that is to in-depth customer research about the pain points that your customers are currently having and trying to answer those pain points. And hopefully we're doing that today by teaching you part of this process. And yeah, it's critically important that you do that, because otherwise you're not really speaking to anyone that turns up. And then the third part is the actual acquisition. It's getting the people to come on to the webinar. So we're going to be talking about this much more next week with Josh and Dan. But this is all about how do you actually execute the invite campaign. Most of the people on this webinar right now would have been part of our outreach campaign that we've done over the last month to invite you to this webinar. So we're going to teach you guys what we did to get you on this webinar today, and you can repeat that process for yourselves with your upcoming webinars as well. So identify, do your content research, match those two things together, and then you go and acquire your audience. The second step of those three steps is the delivery. So you've got your audience, they've just joined, like we did a few minutes ago, everyone's joined. Now what? So delivering the best content that you can. Again, it comes down to the research, but it's also about how does it look and feel? Is it clear? Are you speaking clearly? Is your guest relevant? So Tom is going to be talking in a minute. Is he relevant to the conversation that we're having as well? He is the short answer. And bringing all of this content together in a way so that people are happy with it and they actually want to share it. It's the virality of the content that's really important. You want people to be able to go and share this with their colleagues afterwards, and that's what's going to generate you more leads than the people that attend on the day. The second part is the logistics. So it's setting up the technology, making sure the guests can join properly, which we had some issues with, but we've solved now. Making sure the polls are working, the Q&A is working properly. Is all the data being tracked? Are you able to export the attendees and their contact details so that you can reach out to them, etc., etc.? So that bit's really important. The process that we use is actually technology agnostic. So we're using Tevent at the moment, but you don't necessarily need to use that. There are dozens of webinar platforms out there, and each of them has their own speciality, if you like. So we're going to be talking about that in the third webinar with Sonia, about how to select the right technology. And then the final part of that technology piece is the qualification. So we use Atomley surveys. It's our own technology, which we're going to launch very soon to understand the thoughts and feelings of the attendees and understand whether they might want to have a follow-on conversation with you or not. So these are the three kind of main parts of the delivery, the during the webinar, the actual hour that webinar is on. These are the things that you need to be thinking about. And then the final step is conversion. So running a post-webinar marketing campaign where you use all of your content that you've generated. So this recording will be used as part of a marketing campaign, for example, and building a sales campaign where you actually follow up on the people that attended and the people that are interested in your services because they said that they are from the survey that you conduct. If you can get those two things right, then you are going to generate pipeline, you're going to generate customers, those customers will turn into revenue, and also you will generate brand awareness. And I think one of the key issues at the moment with the industry is marketers are more interested in the brand awareness than they are in the sales outcome. And it shouldn't be the brand awareness that leads the reason why you're doing webinars. It should be a byproduct of why you're doing the webinars. But yeah, you can get brilliant brand awareness and education out into the marketplace by doing webinars as well. Okay, so those are some summary points of what we do and how we do it. We're going to go into loads more detail over the next 3 weeks as well. But for now, we're going to move over and have an interview with Tom about what he does. Before I go into that, though, just a mention of the survey. So in a second, or it may have already been, yep, it's already been done. Charlie has popped the survey link into the chat, and he's activated the chat. So we're going to ask you shortly to fill in the survey. You can do it now if you like, but give it a few minutes and listen to the interview first before you make a decision on that. We will donate one breakfast to a child in poverty for every survey that gets submitted. So we are donating to charity on your behalf. You don't have to put your hand in your pocket at all. As a thank you for you filling in the survey, we're going to donate to charity. And obviously, we're also going to get your feedback, which is really valuable to us so that we can work out how to improve, and also so that we can understand if you're interested in running webinars and how we can help you do that as well. So that's going to go up on the screen in a sec. And Charlie's going to share his screen, and we're going to have that thermometer in a second, and we'll come on to that. So Tom, if you're able to unmute, can you hear me? So let's talk about your kind of great successes that you've had in the past with. Let me just exit my screen share there. The great successes that you've had in the past with your webinars. So can you just tell us a little bit about the experiences that you had before you ran this big 250k webinar last year, which I think was the first major webinar that you had great successes with. What was your prior experience with webinars before that as part of your marketing strategies?
Yeah, of course. So the context being that this webinar we ran actually was one of the first ones we ran since I joined Datasparq. So prior to Datasparq, I've been in other organizations doing similar roles in sales, actually predominantly in sales. And my experience has been very sales demand the need for leads, marketing respond with the need to run webinars, and there just is a big gulf of expectation misalignment, and everybody ends up unhappy, basically, in short. And from a sales, kind of coming more from a traditional salesperson's perspective, the webinars are run, there would be pretty good attendance, but the kind of qualified leads at the back end would be really poor. So, there was very rarely hitting any kind of sales numbers off the back of the webinar. So when I joined Datasparq, kind of one of the things I wanted to do was bring sales and marketing much closer together. So have them have the shared common goal, and that shared common goal is all about revenue and pipeline. And as Tom said, there are things in there around brand awareness and other things we want to achieve, but the commonality between the two departments is revenue and sales, but revenue predominantly. So what we did with the webinar was said, okay, that if that's the goal, how do we then work backwards to make sure that that webinar is going to be successful and deliver on that goal? So that's kind of the difference. Like historically, there's been a big disconnect, and they've not been that successful. And what we wanted to do was establish this kind of like try to bring the alignment in and have some real coordination between the objective of achieving revenue at the back of it.
Sure. Yeah, it's a common issue that we see, right? That marketers are expected to do these top of funnel activities, but they don't necessarily know how that converts into middle of funnel for sales. And so, like we're talking about today, webinars can actually be effective top, middle, and bottom of the funnel, not just not just at the top of the funnel. So that alignment piece is really important. The sales team need to inform the marketing team of what they expect and what they want to achieve, so that the marketing team can do that properly.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So why did you decide to sort of invest the budget that you had and the time that you had into that particular format? Or maybe you can explain the format that you used and why you decided to go down that route.
Yeah. So I guess, no surprise, everybody, if we look back to last year and COVID and the lockdowns, from getting to market and getting in front of people, everything was virtual. So we were basically driven down the webinar route. But I'd already had a view that webinars could be run more effectively, and it was going to be it still is a key part of our strategy. But this particular webinar was right. We need to kind of get ourselves out there in the market using a format that's accessible for everybody. So webinars tick that box in a way that differentiates ourselves from everybody else who's doing it. So I went on the basis that there's a lot of people doing webinars in the way that I've had previous experience of being part of the webinar scene, and therefore, if we take that as the standard, how do we differentiate ourselves? And so what we thought was, right, we need to have we need to have a couple of hooks, a couple of reasons why people are going to attend. We need to make sure that those hooks and those reasons are targeted at the right people, and that there's a real purpose for them being there. And then once we've got them hooked, we need to absolutely drive home the need for them to attend and do everything we can to make that happen. And our viewpoint was, and Tom to tee this up, we did wine tasting webinars, but then as well as wine tasting, we kind of combined it with a bit of the second I think it was the second webinar topic Tom talked about around thought leadership, and we structured it in a way that said, if you come along, not only are you going to hear from some leading organizations in the market who are doing this stuff already, so Datasparqs all about data science and data analytics, not only are you going to hear from leading organizations who are pioneering the way in this, we'll also give you some wine tasting. So we'll have some really insightful talks, we'll break it up with some entertainment, and we'll give you a chance to ask any questions you like, and we'll only take up, I think we scheduled it for an hour and a half maybe, because the wine tasting took a bit longer. So it was quite short and sweet. No one had to leave their home. Wine got delivered to them, and they got to hear from at least 2 external speakers from well-known companies with some really great use cases and stories. And they were our major hooks to get people along. And that was the mantra of the format, really, was like, we felt that would be a really, really good way to differentiate ourselves from the, hey, we're running a webinar, come and sign up and hear from Datasparq about how we deliver data science. It was like, no one's going to turn up to that. So we purposely didn't do any pitching, and actually we kept our intro really short. I think our intro to Datasparq was like 5 minutes, if that. And it was more like setting the scene of, we're a young company, we do data science, but we wanted to facilitate, an hour for you to have some nice wine and to hear from some experts in the field. Boom, over to speaker 1. And that was literally how we did it. So totally trying to break the mold of kind of, the standard webinar approach.
Yeah, I mean, it's a format really that you would typically see in more of a face-to-face environment, right? But you guys managed to adapt a face-to-face or in-person event to a virtual event format. And obviously during COVID, everyone was having to innovate in that way. But what we've learned off the back of that is actually the whole hybrid way of doing webinars or doing events in general is really valid, and it will continue on in the future. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I'm going to ask every one of our guests over the next 4 weeks what they think the future is. So I'm going to ask you that in a second. But first of all, just to get a bit deeper on that format, say, what effect did running it in that way have? In other words, is getting people drunk on a webinar a good way of generating leads? I'm sure you didn't get them completely missed, but it'd be good to understand how that worked.
Yeah, what was really interesting actually was the feedback after. So what we found was that so a couple of things. Offering the wine gave us a really good reason to reach out to the people immediately once they're registered. And it wasn't a pestering email, it wasn't anything salesy, it was, can we have your address and your phone number so we can give it over to the delivery company so we can make sure you've got this wine in time for the webinar. And it was just an amazing filter for who was really engaged and who had speculatively just signed up. And actually the response rate was really high from registrants. I don't think we had a big kind of dropout at that point. Off the top of my head, I think maybe 1 or 2 kind of went silent on us, but everybody else was engaged. So straight away, you've got them engaged. They've handed over, personal details, right? They've trusted you with their home address. You've sent them something in return. There's this kind of engagement and bond between us, the establisher of this webinar, this event, and them, the attendees. And as the event ran, they've had a lovely time. Everyone's really engaged. You can see that. And at the end, the feedback is, there's basically 2 things they can feedback on: how great the wine was and how much fun they had, or how insightful the talks were and how much they learnt. And actually, in most cases, people fed back on both. So there was a dual reason for them to actually come in and say, yeah, we had a great time, absolutely loved it. And there was a sense of, I wouldn't say ownership. They didn't owe us anything. Ownership, sorry. Like, they didn't owe us anything, but pretty much everybody took a call off. So we look at this kind of conversion funnel, right? From over 50% of the attendees took an exploratory call. I mean, I think I spoke to everybody, but not everybody was up for having a proper exploratory half-hour kind of call as to what's going on in their business. And we were able to prioritize those follow-ups because we'd used, a really intelligent survey tool as well. In fact, actually, we used Atomley, little plug, but it's brilliant, right? It just really helps having something that allows you to understand the positioning and intent of your attendees in a really non-aggressive and traditionally formatted survey way was fantastic. And we even had feedback on that as well, how easy that process was. So kind of from acquiring attendees and getting them engaged, maintaining the engagement, and then following up, it was just a really nice way of doing it. And I think the wine element, giving something, lent itself to that. That was like the permanent hook, held that together.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's on the screen now. Hopefully, everyone can see this as well. I think the format that you guys chose, there's in the middle statistics. So conversion from registration to attendee, 89% is astronomically high. Right, that's probably the best that we've ever seen in all the research that we've done and webinars that we've run. But also the rate from attendees to exploratory calls, like you said, over half of those people that attended were interested in having a follow up with you, and they explicitly asked for that. That is rare, but it's a byproduct of running a great webinar. So it proves this concept that we're talking about today, which is if you do it right, it is possible to get these statistics. And think about it compared to, I don't know, cold email, LinkedIn outreach, PPC ads. Like, none of those funnels convert in the way that this does. And how much do you spend? A case of wine is 30, 40 quid, something like that. So if you've got 20 people, it's not a huge expense to do this. Cool. Okay. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Charlie can put the thermometer back up. Sorry, Tom.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that was a really interesting point. And actually, that was a great, I think one of your stats was around why do people do it? Because they struggle to justify the ROI. Well, when we kind of thought about this whole wine idea, actually, it's really scalable. While we wanted it to be more intimate, and I think we had, there's 30 odd attendees, I think we targeted having 20. And actually, I think COVID probably drove a higher sign-up rate because people had a bit more time, to be honest, right? But what we've noticed subsequently is actually offering the wine. You're not booking a meeting, you're not booking a physical event space, you're not committing to a number of tables. It's scalable. So actually, if only 5 people turned up, what we would have done was we'd have twisted the format slightly and actually made it much more interactive and made it more workshop based and had the talks and probably had more of an exploratory discussion over the wine. Whereas because we had 30, we couldn't do that, right? So we had to move on and kind of keep the sommelier talking through the wine. But if we'd wanted to have 50, 60, 70, well, it's just another case of wine you're sending out, and then you move to more of the webinar traditional format like this. So there is scalability in that approach as well. And then the ROI comes because if you're hitting numbers like we were, 50% of your guests are taking meetings with you afterwards, and you've got a high conversion rate to opportunities and wins, then frankly, you'll get ROI out of it, right? Maybe not on a per sign up basis, but on an overall number, you will definitely get an ROI from it. That's worth shouting about.
Yeah, that point around pivoting and scalability, that is the beauty of running this type of event, right? Obviously, there's a sunk cost in the way that you guys did it. There's a sunk cost in the wine. Hopefully, even if people don't turn up, they'll still thank you for the wine afterwards, and that will be a way to speak to them. But it costs on average $100 a month to subscribe to a webinar platform like this one or one of the others in the market. It's a low cost way of engaging with people, and hopefully people don't forget that it really is a valid way now that we're starting to go back into the office. There's still a place for this. People are still working from home 2 or 3 days a week, and you can't reach them face to face, or not everyone's comfortable going to a big exhibition hall with 10,000 people in it yet, right? So there's still a place for this, and there will be in the future as well. Okay, good. Well, I'm just going to pause very briefly to say, guys, please do ask questions in the questions tab. Tom and I will start answering those in a second. I've just got a couple more questions for him first. And also, please do make your donation, or allow us to make your donations by submitting the survey. You can scan the QR code bottom left corner of the screen there. Or you can click the link, which is pinned at the top of the chat as well. Okay, so Tom, we heard about the sort of 250k deal that you closed. Obviously, you don't want to talk too much or deeply about that and who that was, but maybe you could just talk a little bit around how influential the webinars are as part of your sales process now that you're doing that on a regular basis. What impact does a webinar have for you now as part of your sales and marketing process?
Yes, so we've integrated webinars as a key part of the sales and marketing strategy plan, however you want to call it. I think it was COVID influenced the need to do them because everything was virtual. We're maintaining that as we're coming out of the pandemic, and there's more face to face. And what we did during lockdown and the webinars was that, part of the survey would ask people for their preferences. Going forward, would you like only virtual events? Would you like face-to-face? Would you like a mix? And I think people were kind of multi-voting, to be honest, but there was definitely an overriding feeling that there's a hybrid world that we're going to be living in. And so what we're looking to do is trying to use webinars and face-to-face events as a kind of lead generation funnel, if you like. One, we can catch two types of people that only want face-to-face events and people that only want virtual, or people that might not be able to make one event or the other, but we can use it as a way to funnel so that actually the face-to-face events we're using for high intent leads have maybe been to some webinars before. So we're still working through it, but that's the thought process we've got. But the key for us is that webinars are vital in terms of the most effective way for us as an organization, a pretty unknown organization, right? I'm guessing most people on this haven't heard of Datasparq. I expect anybody to, but it's a really good way for us to get in front of our target audience, because we have the ability to bring along people from the industry that we know, who have a much higher ability to catch people and interest level than Datasparq or unheard of. So it's a great way to get an unknown company with I think a really good thing to say in front of the target audience, and then keep them engaged with that process, and then following up with them out the back of it to make sure that we capitalize on the insight and the goodwill that we've generated during the webinar. By insight, I mean what they've said in the survey. So making sure we ask the right questions and get an understanding of their business, and then use those answers in the way we speak to them. So we did a couple of things. As part of every webinar we ran, we offered for the attendees, as a kind of sort of another thank you, we offered to run a free workshop for them to explore their, how they're using data and see if there are any opportunities for them in the business. And they were able to say whether they're interested or not. Simple yes, no question. And that straight away gave us a view of intent, who was interested in that. And then what was of most interest to me actually was we asked the question around, can Datasparq help you? And I think the options were yes, no, unsure. And so many people tick the unsure box. And that was really interesting because it did a couple of things. Right? First, it validated that we weren't actually trying to sell to them. So we hadn't been really explicit about what we do. That wasn't a bad thing. That was an intentional move on our part to make people not feel pressured. The second was that it made me feel they were open to a conversation around exploring whether or not we could help. Because as part of those responses, they'd also said some of the problems they had. Now, I know we can solve their problems. They were unclear. So when I'm talking to them, you can get them opening up really quickly by saying, look, you said you were interested in the workshop. This is what it's about. Kind of what are you trying to uncover? Conversation gets started. You said you weren't sure we could help. Well, this is some of the problems you talked about. And actually, we have done these before, here, and here. Exactly what your problems. Conversation started, and we started exploring it. So they're kind of pushing them through the webinar and having the insight around what their challenges are was just like gold dust in terms of the follow-ups afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to be talking to Scott Cowley about that on the 4th webinar in a few weeks' time. So anyone that's kind of interested from a sales point of view on how to utilize the answers to the survey, which you guys are filling in right now, which can be configured. So Tom's version that he will have used and still uses is different to the questions that we're asking today. That can be configured. The answers to those questions can then help you drive that sales conversation, like you said, Tom. A point that I wanted to make as well is, it's naive of us to think as salespeople that we, after a 30-minute or a 1-hour webinar, that our prospects will be able to say yes to that question that you mentioned, right? Do you think that Datasparq can solve your problem? But that's exactly the point. Understanding where their heads are, and if they do say not sure or no, actually, it's just a way of starting a conversation with them, like you say. And so, yeah, Scott's going to be talking all about that. He's really good at sort of asking the right questions and using the data that you gather in the qualification process in order to run a sales cycle. So yeah, that's a really important part of this. Obviously, the webinar itself, the work doesn't stop when you finish the recording today and everything's done and we all go back to our day to day, right? There's more work to be done in the sales afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, and last question, which I'm going to be asking all of our guests: what do you see as the future of virtual events, and where does webinars kind of fit into that? You mentioned that you're working on your strategy for 2022 at the moment. What do you see the future of the
Yeah,
industry and
I think
webinars being?
I still think it's going to be a key part of, well, it's certainly going to be a key part of our strategy. I guess if I step out of my role and think about what I get targeted with, I get targeted all the time with people asking about my lead gen strategy and can they help me with lead generation. And the things that I'm most interested in are when people are offering something I can go along and watch and listen to or get involved with from a workshop. And so I think if I think about as me as a consumer of a webinar, then I'm interested in attending them if I feel I'm going to get value and insight out of them. So I then flip back into my role and think they're absolutely vital to the marketing, sales, lead generation process. But to your point, Tom, only if they're done properly. So if they're valuable, targeting the right people, and delivering on what you say that you're going to deliver on. So there's nothing worse than setting up a webinar. You set it up correctly, but actually when the people attend, it's not what you said on the tin, and I've been there before, previous lives. And yeah, our focus is kind of being ruthless about saying we're going to do something, doing it, and then basically saying what we did, and then reaping the rewards afterwards. So yeah, for me, it's a hybrid world, really important. I think face-to-face events will come back in, and I think it's important to work out how you merge the two in so you can be most effective across all of your efforts. But from a webinar perspective, yeah, plan it, do it right, and then reap the benefits after you've done it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we had this discussion the other day, but just for the benefit of the audience listening as well. I think we're both aligned, and other people that we're talking to in the industry are quite aligned on the fact that using webinars, that sort of mass attendance type webinar that we were talking about earlier, as your top of funnel activity, and then a more focused roundtable type event like what you guys do, that has a place, but also doing awareness sort of top of funnel webinars and then transitioning to a face-to-face environment and using that hybrid model is also going to work as well. And it's, yeah, like you say, it's just about understanding what's your budget, what can you feasibly do with the X £1,000, tens of thousands of pounds that you have to spend, and where is that best put. And I think webinars is always going to be, in terms of cost per lead and cost per deal, it's always going to be up there for B2B sales as one of those lead generation strategies that really works and has a relatively low cost. Yeah. Okay, no, good.
You're right. I was going to
say on that.
Tom. You said about brand awareness, because we ran a webinar the other day actually, which was solely focused on brand awareness, and we sort of said at the start we'd never do it, but we launched a new kind of offering and a capability and thought, do you know what, actually, let's just flip our model on its head and do this purely around brand awareness, and the objective being to drive increased traffic to the web, our website, and our tool that we've developed, and get the promotional activity out. And yes, it was more of a mass market. I don't think it's going to return the leads we expected, but in terms of lead generation. But then the ROI question is totally different, because all you're paying for is a subscription to the webinar service, which you've probably already sunk already in previous webinars. So technically, the cost is pretty much zero. It's the time effort from the people involved. And then, if you have, if there's been a spike in website traffic and people know more about us, we've actually achieved what we wanted to. And we can evidence that by showing what the uptick in web traffic is and sign-ups and people that we've engaged with.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's all about multi-channel marketing, right? And if you can start to funnel people towards a certain landing page or something, and then maybe that landing page transitions to a registration page for another webinar, and then you sequence your webinars together and away you go. Good. Okay, I'm just going to move to the audience questions. It's 1:45, so we'll do 5 or 10 minutes of questions. So guys, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. We've got a few already that you can upvote them by clicking the heart. So I'm just going to go from top to bottom, the ones that are being requested the most. So we've got a question here from Josh. It says, how soon after the event were you doing the exploratory calls, Tom?
Great question. So the way we structure it, so I've got in my team, I've got, well, actually this one, I think I did them, but we subsequently got an SDR on board. But kind of the next, so we ran the events, I think we ran them kind of 4 o'clock, or maybe it's 5 o'clock, and they ran for an hour and a half. So obviously having had some wine, it's best to leave everybody alone. But what we did was the next day or over the next couple of days, once we decided amongst ourselves and the team, did we know people who should make the outbound call? We were on the phone to everybody saying, we hope you had a great time. Thank you for coming. And then just exploring a little bit. And if we could open up a conversation, then that was the exploratory call. If they didn't answer, or if they're like, look, I'm really busy, I can't talk right now, it's like, right, can we book 30 minutes just to have a more in-depth conversation with you? So the answer to that is kind of twofold. Like, pretty much within a matter of days, we're on the phone to say thank you for coming. We hope you had a great time, and try to kick off the exploratory call. But then most of the calls were scheduled to happen within at least a month, if not sooner, after the webinar. So the initial outreach to the attendees is really quick, but just to capitalize on them having been there. But that's because the sole purpose of that event, it's not like, I mean, I guess, Tom, you're running a series of them now, right, in terms of how you're structuring it. This was a one-off webinar that we did. And while Datasparq is all about data and AI and data science, and every webinar's got the same theme, we're delivering very specific events where the guest speakers are who they are on that event. And so we didn't link it as part of the series. So we were keen to follow up afterwards to capitalize on, I guess, the goodwill and the engagement we had as part of that event.
Yeah, so I'll just add to that. So I think speed to follow up is really important. Again, like Tom said, it depends on the format. So for us, as part of the series, really the main ask that I've got of you guys today as an audience is to come to the next one next week, and the one after, and the one after. So for us, trying to book calls with people who may be interested in Atomley Fusion and its services, actually, we'd rather see people go through the process first and then have a call with them. If they want to speak to us sooner, we'll accept that, and we'd love to have those inbound requests. But for us, it's about putting people through that webinar funnel and educating them on everything that we have to offer, so that when we do the discovery call with them, they actually already know about what we do. So it transitions into the sales call much smoother if we've already educated them on what we do. Generally speaking, if you're doing a one-off, I would say try to reach the really high intent leads, and Atomley, for example, will give you a lead score and rank it from top to bottom. You want to be getting to the highest intent leads within 48 hours. If you've got an SDR available and you've got the ability to go outbound and someone that's comfortable on the phone. Also follow up in terms of email, sharing the recording, etc. All of that stuff. If you can do it within 24, 48 hours, that's also good. Yeah, people are busy. They leave this webinar, you might be going on another one or two by the end of this week. So it's all about keeping people engaged while you've got them. Good. Okay, so that was the first one. Question here, was the conversion rate from invite to registration, so the top of the funnel, that was 18% for your webinar, Tom. Is that a typical conversion rate for you guys? And then I can answer that question from a more general point of view as well.
I think we are seeing it about that point, maybe hovering. I think we probably had a peak conversion for that webinar, actually. But yeah, around 15% or so is probably what we're seeing. I can put the numbers somewhere to dig out. I'll let you answer.
I'll answer while you're doing that. So I think the general answer to this question is it depends on the format. So for mass attendance, we're actually going to show some of Will It Make the Boat Go Faster's stats next week. I can't remember them off the top of my head. I should know them really, because we helped them run that webinar. But they typically send out 600 plus invites, and they get over 150, sometimes more than 200 people attending their webinars. So they're getting about 25 to 30%. They've been running that series for a few years. I think they've done 14 or 15 webinars as part of that series every quarter. So they've been doing it for a while, and they've got a returning user base and a net new user base that come to that every time. So that's especially high. I would say 30% is pretty high. 18%, 20% is good. Less than 15 or 12%, maybe not quite so good. But it depends on the format. Tom was targeting really senior people with your webinars, right? Tom, you're targeting decision makers and people that might not have the time. So 18% is pretty good for people that are C-level or VP level and above. If you're doing a mass audience and you're targeting decision maker -1 or -2 levels, then 20 to 30% is probably more along the lines of expectation. So it really depends on who you're targeting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I noticed there was another question asked around who are we inviting? Do we know them already, or were they cold? And I think to give context, that conversion stat, they were cold. So we had picked off a list of people. We wanted to meet new people because as a young company with contacts, but we want to meet new people is really because the lifeblood of the company. We really need to do that. So we drew up a list of 200 people that we wanted to come. We hoped to get 20 people along. We did better than our objective, but they were cold net new people. And I just looked at the stats. So we had 18% of that webinar. I think we ran another one in 21 that got 20% kind of conversion. Did we then change the format slightly and move from a kind of general AI webinar to a very specific industry webinar, and the conversion was less. I think it dropped down to 13% based on what stats I've just seen. But then we kind of anticipated that might happen, but we were just playing around with the type of people we're inviting in the audience. And then we've run another one, which again was around 15%, I think, the conversion. But I think coming out of, I mean, that's 4 webinars, right? But coming out of COVID and people doing more face-to-face and people's time being busier, I know I'm busier, but I would expect the conversion rate to be slightly lower now compared to what it was before. So yeah, I think if it dropped, to your point, Tom, if it dropped below 10%, I would be pretty concerned. I think even actually if it's probably below 15, I would as well. But yeah, I'll be targeting 15%.
Yeah, I'd say we've got some stats that we'll share next week from Josh at Will It Make the Boat Go Faster. So they've also seen anecdotally as well, they've seen that drop off from the ones that they've done in 2022, especially since after in the UK, they've got a mainly UK focused audience. After Boris announced that everything was kind of being lifted in March, the ones that they've done since then, they've actually seen a lower registration rate and a lower attendance rate, but they've seen an increase in the people that are registering to watch it on demand afterwards. So overall, they're seeing about the same number of eyeballs on the webinar, but it's just distributed over a longer period of time. And so obviously we have to, as hosts, we have to accommodate for that and make sure that we're sharing the on demand and it's accessible, it's easy to reach. So that's going to be really important moving forward as well.
I think that's a really interesting point, because to get some context, sorry, Tom, our webinars, we didn't record any of our webinars, so we made them exclusive in terms of that was also the third hook. It was like, if you don't turn up, you're not going to hear this, right? So that's the reason we're coming along. But we were also a little bit, we had to do that because it was almost like kind of Chatham House rules, because we had these speakers that wanted to come along, and some of the organisation, they didn't want to go through the official channels to get off for speaking. So they were like, look, we'll come along, but you can't record it, right? And we'll do the talk. So it actually worked in our favour, I think, to drive some of that engagement and attendance, because it was like, oh, hang on, we get to hear from this massive UK retailer about what they're doing. Wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise, so we'll come along, right? We'll hear about it.
Yeah, it's a decision, like the exclusivity concept is a decision that has to be made. Like we're recording this one today, and we will distribute it afterwards. But yeah, exactly like you say, there is a reason to restrict from time to time. Obviously, if part of the concept is that you send them a case of wine, if someone's watching it, like a random person is watching it on demand, and 3 weeks later on 10 o'clock on a Friday night because they've got a bottle of wine handy, it's probably not the sort of person that you want to be converting anyway. So yeah, it depends on the format, depends on the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Exactly. Okay, so I'll take one more question because we're coming up to the hour. I'm just trying to decide between these two because they're both good questions. Maybe we can do both if we're quick. So most successful outreach tool, what are our recommendations? So LinkedIn, email, etc. Tom, what's your kind of outreach sequence? How do you run the invite process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like a combination of them. So because we were specific on the 200 people that we were targeting for that webinar, it was right, we're going to research them on LinkedIn, we're going to click on their profiles, we want to know that they've seen, that we've viewed them. Then there's can we connect? We're running an event that we think will be perfect for you. Yeah, they connect, you share the invite, but we also go and find the email and send them an email. So kind of it was across all channels really, but it's a combination. I guess how you use it is what you feel comfortable with, and maybe what's worked in the past in the business. But yeah, we did a mix of it, and there was a lot of profiling the people using LinkedIn and Sales Navigator and kind of good tools that you can get. But there was a real decision point that was like, no, we're going to actively click on their profiles, let them know we're looking at them, so they can see that Tom from Datasparq or John from Datasparq is Sarah from Datasparq are looking at them to work out what they're doing. And there was a view that was a good way to get our name recognized, and then they'll be expecting the request to come.
Yeah. So I'll give a brief answer to this because we're going to cover it next week in a lot more detail, actually. But so the way that we do it is exactly the same as Tom: multi-channel, multi-touch point outreach. What I would say is automation is great, but there's a danger of over-engineering and over-automating this stuff as well. If you've got an SDR available, I'll rephrase that. Make some time for one of your SDRs, if you have SDRs, to put aside some time in the 2-3 weeks running up to a webinar to put in some market research calls to your highest ICP, like the hottest leads that you really want to reach. We actually didn't do it for this webinar, but we're going to be doing it in the future when we've got more resource. But if you can put in a call to these people and say, hey, saw that you signed up, it's next Tuesday, remind them of the time and date, make sure that they're going to come. Do you have any questions that you want to ask the host? What is your biggest pain point? And then you can actually adjust your content. If you do that a week or two in advance, you can actually adjust your content so that it's speaking to those people as well. So doing LinkedIn, email outreach, even WhatsApp and text outreach is starting to become a thing as well now, multi-channel, and then slipping in a couple of market research calls. People don't always pick up, but if they do, you're much more likely to get those people to turn up and engage with you and possibly ask you a good question for the Q&A as well. Okay, last one. Did you have the contact details already? I think you might have answered this one already, actually, Tom. Did you have the contact details already from another marketing activity, or were they pulled out to increase? Sorry, I'm making a hash of this. Basically, were they already in your funnel or not? And why did you pick them out of your funnel if you did pick them out of your funnel?
Yeah, no. It's a really good question. And I think as we've run more, we have recycled people through and pulled them out the funnel. But that particular webinar, it was 200 brand new contacts. I think we did it in a couple of ways. So we did direct outreach, as we just talked about, using an SDR and LinkedIn and email ourselves. We also went to some of our partners, some technology partners we use and other kind of organizations we work with, and said, hey, look, we're running this webinar. You don't do this stuff, but we know it's of interest to your clients based on the work you do and what you're trying to sell. Would they be interested in coming along? So they were basically the channels we used. So we had completely cold people we wanted, people we were really interested in and therefore wanted to warm up ourselves. We had other organizations who had warm people that were probably interested in the topic who we didn't know, but they could bring them along. And they were the two channels that we used. And they're the ones that we still use. We've just added in that third one now of, well, we have contacts, we have, some intent data on some of our existing prospects. So we'll decide who we bring into the funnel. We've also got customers that we bring along as a bit of a hey, come on, you'll enjoy this, and just to cement that relationship. So we've slightly evolved the webinar from being pure net new, meet new people, lead gen, to an element of relationship building with existing customers as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, webinars are still we focus on demand and lead generation, customer generation webinars, but webinars are still a great way to engage with existing customers and your current pipeline as well. And yeah, often if the content's right, if it's a content type that's specifically targeted at net new, maybe this doesn't quite work. But generally speaking, inviting people that are in your early to mid pipeline is never really going to do you much harm. So we always recommend that you use this as part of your nurturing as well as part of your outreach process as well. Okay, cool. It's coming up to time. Thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you, Tom, so much for your input as well. Really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you very much. Everyone else that's on the call, if you haven't done so yet, please do fill in the survey. It helps us to understand what we could do better, and it's also helping charity as well, which is great for everyone. If you want to come along to next week's webinar, which is all about how to run the kind of pre-webinar marketing process, how to get people onto the webinar and then get them sort of fully engaged when they're on the webinar, please do come along next week. That's on Tuesday afternoon with Josh and Dan as the guest speakers. Beyond that, this has been recorded. We're going to share that with everyone afterwards as well. I hope you also liked the Tevent platform. We'd love to get feedback because we're partnered with them. Some of the Tevent guys are on the call. I'm sure they'd love to get some feedback as well. So yeah, thank you everyone so much. Hopefully this was good for you all, and we're looking forward to seeing you next Tuesday as well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.